with an introduction to Irene Axelrod, who will be speaking about the life and work of Lydia Pinkham. Irene Axelrod is a great friend to the House of the Seven Gables. She worked here for many years in the 90s and early 2000s. She helped with the archives for Caroline Emerton, who is the founder of the House of the Seven Gables, and has really been one of the main researchers in the area who's helped to kind of craft what we know about the life and work of our founder, Caroline Emerton. Irene Axelrod is passionate about women's history, and with that passion about women's history, it fit in great with our theme for Enterprising Women this year. And we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of the sign over of suffrage for women here in the United States and the women's right to vote. We all strongly encourage you to use that right to vote in every election possible, and pay homage to the many, many women who fought for that and advocated for that right to vote in the past, in the present, and those who are going to continue to do so in the future. So on that note, I would love to introduce Irene Axelrod. If you have any issues, please feel free to put them in the chat. I will do my best to address them for you. Again, this is a little bit new for me. This is our first Zoom lecture in this way. We're really excited to give it a try and have you all on board. Irene, welcome.
Thank you, Julie. I'm very happy to be here this evening. The House of the Seven Gables feels like home. And I wanted to tell you a little bit of the story of Lydia Pinkham. And I hope you will have some questions later on, especially if there's anything that you know that I leave out. So years ago, and in fact, I think it was 1997, some of you may remember the lectures that Jim McAllister was doing at the old Lyceum restaurant. And he began to ask other people to help him out by taking a turn to do a talk. And he said to me, well, you should learn about Lydia Pinkham. You live in Lynn, which is true. And I had been interested in her for quite some time anyway. So I began to do some research. I began to do some collecting, and you'll see the results of that as we go on. And I became fascinated with the story of this woman, and also a little frustrated that there wasn't more of her letters, of her diaries, of her journals available.
You're okay.
All right. And so as we go on, I am going to come to you as Lydia Pinkham for a little bit and tell you her story. And then later on, and I'll let you know when, I will come back to being Irene. So again, I'm very glad that you're all here this evening. I was born on February 9th, 1819 in Lynn, Massachusetts. I was the 10th of 12 children. My parents were William and Rebecca Estes. My father was a shoemaker. He also was a farmer, and he dealt in real estate. He owned quite a bit of property in Lynn. And when he started his shoemaking business, Lynn was just becoming known as the city of shoes. My parents and all of my siblings were members of the Lynn Friends Society, and we know them as Quakers. We left that Quaker meeting over a dispute. The Friends refused to endorse the abolition of slavery, and we were then known as come-outers because we were no longer members of the Quaker meeting. Our home was a gathering place for anti-slavery leaders: Frederick Douglass, Abby Kelly, William Lloyd Garrison, just to name a few. At 16, I became a member of the Lynn Female Anti-Slavery Society. And as I said, I knew Frederick Douglass, and my sisters and brothers did as well. Now, one time he came to Lynn with the purpose of doing a lecture, which he had been warned not to deliver. So my sisters and I put back on our Quaker dress, and we surrounded him in a circle and walked him to the lecture hall with no incidents of any kind. I graduated with honors from the Lynn Academy, and one of my teachers was Alonzo Lewis, of whom you may have heard. He was my teacher. He was also an author and a historian. And during this time, just after graduating, I met Isaac Pinkham. Isaac came from Dover, New Hampshire. And there was a saying in Dover, New Hampshire that went, "Never bother a Pinkham when he is thinking." We married in 1843. Now, Isaac saw business opportunities at every corner, and that became part of the story of our married life. We had 3 sons who were all born in Lynn, and 1 daughter who was born in Bedford. Charles was born in 1844, Daniel in 1849, William in 1852, and then Adeline in 1857. And I mentioned that she was born in Bedford, Massachusetts. Times had become hard, and Isaac wanted to take up the idea of being a farmer, and that's what we did when we lived in Bedford. But eventually, we did move back to Lynn. All 4 of our children graduated from high school with honors. This was a family pattern. And besides raising the children and helping Isaac when he needed, I assisted our friends and neighbors with their matters of health. I had experience and knowledge of home remedies. I knew the use of herbs to cure various illnesses, and I put together ingredients for a tonic. And that recipe was never a secret. Here's what was in it: unicorn root, life root, black cohosh, pleurisy root, fenugreek seed, and alcohol, of course, as a solvent and medicinal purposes. I was a member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, as were most of my family and friends, and my children were also temperance advocates. Now, by 1873, banks had failed and a depression came all over the country. Isaac's health also failed. A grocery store that was started by our son Dan failed. He refused to sell alcohol, and some said that was the reason for the failure. We felt that it was just a sign of the times. Now, we would often have family meetings where we would want to get together and figure out what came next, who had ideas about what to do, and we all had a chance to share these with each other. As we sat down, 2 women from Salem came in a carriage, pulled up to the front of our house in Lynn. They knew about the vegetable compound, and that is what we called the tonic, although, as you've just heard, there were no vegetables in it. They offered to pay $5 for 6 bottles of medicine. I'd always given it away before because, as I said, I wanted to help people. And Dan said, well, if those ladies will come all the way from Salem to get that medicine, why can it not be sold to other people? Why can't we go into the business of making and selling it, same as other medicines? And there were quite a few medicines at the time. At first, I said no, and then I was talked into the scheme. We all had our tasks. I made the medicine in our basement kitchen. The boys distributed it and handed out handbills, advertisements for the product. Adeline contributed money from her teacher's salary, and Isaac was consulted on each step along the way. Dan had the idea of going to New York City because he thought many people there would be interested. He had the idea of putting my photograph on the advertising and on the product labels. This was a time when women's names were not supposed to appear in print, except perhaps when they were born, maybe when they were married, and certainly when they died. Will visited the Boston Herald office after he had collected an $84 check for an order. We were upset that he spent the entire amount on advertising. Imagine my surprise when the advertisement appeared above each column in the paper. And at that point, the business took off. Dan, from New York, addressed his letters home to dear doctors. Testimonials began to come in from women who took the compound and found their health restored. I told them to leave the doctors alone and to exercise, get fresh air, and eat healthy food. and also to bathe daily. Dan came home from New York with a persistent cough. I tried to cure him. He went south, hoping that the warm weather would help. But he passed away in October of 1881, a month before his 33rd birthday. Will also contracted consumption, and he died in Los Angeles 2 months after Dan. Will was 28. Now, by this time, we were doing very well. So these deaths were an awful blow to me, to Isaac, to our son Charles, the oldest in the family, and to our daughter Caroline. We had become well known all over the world because of the advertising that had been done. And songs were written in my name. The two remaining children, as I said, Charles and Caroline, ran the business. And Lydia Pinkham died in May of 1883. She was devastated by the death of her two sons. Her company had begun to prosper. Isaac lived for 6 years, taken care of by his two remaining children. And the company, again, continued to prosper. Now, people were writing letters to Mrs. Pinkham, not necessarily realizing that Lydia had passed away, but letters would come to Mrs. Pinkham, Lynn, Massachusetts. And Charles' wife, Jenny, had taken over the business of responding to each inquiry. This became too much for her at a certain point. And so women were hired to work, to answer the letters. They were trained in the style of the responses that they were to give. And they were called typewriters, lady typewriters. And the company, which started in the basement of the Pinkham home, soon moved to a factory on Western Ave. That factory is still in existence today. The building is still there. And now there are many small businesses, arts and crafts, internet technology studios, lots of different places that you can visit. And they have open houses several times a year. So if you have never been there, I recommend that you go and you can check out some of the history that was started by Lydia Pinkham and her vegetable compound. And I have some of my collection. I've been collecting items since 1997, and I'd like to share some of those with you now. This is one of the bottles, and you can see that it has a very long label. Now, when Lydia was writing the advertising labels, she put a great deal of information on there. And people read it, and it encouraged them to buy the product, to try it, and to recommend it to their friends. And this is how the business started. And as time went on, they began to have pills. They had what we would today call a body wash and lots of other things. And actually, if you inquire at a vitamin store or even on eBay, you can still purchase these products. Eventually, the business was sold to a larger company, Cooper Laboratories. That did not happen until the 1960s. The Pinkhams were all marketing geniuses. I think they would have been advertising executives and development directors and all sorts of things that we are familiar with today, but they started this procedure. Now, this card is a picture, I hope you can see it, of the Brooklyn Bridge. When Dan was living in New York, he came up with the idea, he had many ideas, came up with the idea of wanting to put a banner advertising the compound across the Brooklyn Bridge. Well, that was never going to happen, but instead, he had printed cards with the picture of the Brooklyn Bridge and with his idea for a banner across it. I have here a picture of two of Lydia Pinkham's granddaughters. It was thought that it would be a nice idea to have some of the family members on a card, and on the back, which I can see, is a very long description of the vegetable compound, a positive cure for all those complaints and weaknesses so common to our best female population. And a lot of the advertising went along that theme. And the bottom of it says, sold by all druggists. Well, there was some objection from the family when Dan put that on the cards. So you can't say it's sold by all druggists. It's sold by some druggists, but he went ahead and said it was sold by all druggists because that's what he wanted to have happen. This is a trivet. It's a picture of Lydia and names of some of her products on here. As I said, these folks were marketing geniuses, and lots of the things that they produced are still in existence today. I have here a sewing kit, again, with the Lydia Pinkham name on it. And here is a picture of Lydia. I don't think we actually resemble each other very much, but I tried to get the outfit right today. But this is the picture that went all over the world. In fact, Lydia's picture was often used for other things. For instance, if the British papers wanted to print a picture of Queen Victoria, they might have put Lydia's picture in instead. So her face became known, and young men who were in college wrote songs about her face, that it followed them everywhere they went. And in the New England area and in the upper middle Atlantic states, advertising of the product was done on barns. So you could even find Lydia's picture on a barn. And I wanted to show this shirt because I got this at the Lydia Pinkham Laboratory building. There was a person that did silk screening, and this says, "We're in the pink." I'm not sure that that was one of her slogans, but she did sign all of her letters, "Yours for health." And again, she did tell people to leave the doctors alone. She did not want them to go to doctors when she felt she had the right medicine to help them to be able to take care of themselves. And as long as they followed her advice, they would be fine, she hoped. Now, some have asked, where do you get your research for this project? And I will say there are a few Lydia Pinkham books around, and I have some of those with me today. This one is Female Complaints. You can see Lydia's picture is there. Lydia Pinkham and the Business of Women's Medicine. And it's quite well done. The first part is biography, and the rest is talking about how advertising was changing during Lydia Pinkham's lifetime from 1819 to 1883. Quite a bit about the fact that her face was on all of her products. This is probably the most recent book, and again talks about the advertising. This is done by a professor from the University of Chicago, and he has quite a bit about the family. He has pictures of all four of the children here, and it's quite well done, so I recommend that one. Two more. We have The Life and Times of Lydia Pinkham by Robert Collier Washburn, who knew her in her and his lifetime. And Lydia Pinkham is Her Name by Jean Burton. And that is kind of a play on words for some of the songs that people wrote about her, because her name and her face were so famous. And I have one more small item I wanted to show you because I like this very much. A tape measure with Lydia's picture on it. And it says on the bottom, "Yours for health," and it has Lydia Pinkham's signature. And on the back, it says, "Lydia E. Pinkham's vegetable compound, blood medicine, sanative wash, liver pills." So as I said, they did come up with more products and more medicine. And I've been asked, have I ever tried it? And the answer to that is no. Some of the bottles here do have medicine in it. And I was just going over some notes today, and someone said, well, if you let it get cold, it tastes kind of like Moxie. And some of you might remember Moxie, a popular soda. So if Julie is ready, I can take some questions.
Absolutely. We'll give it a try. As long as you can hear me, maybe repeat back.
Okay.
So the first question that we have, and we've had a couple that have come in on chat.
Right.
If you can speak a little more about Lydia Pinkham's anti-slavery efforts,
Sure.
Expand on that a little bit.
A little bit. We don't know a whole lot. I know that the Schlesinger Library has her papers, and as I understand it, those are mostly business papers, but I would like to look into this further myself. We know that her family was active. As I said, we know that her house was a meeting place, and this was as she was growing up in a family of 12. We know that her sister, whose name was Julielma, she was named after the wife of William Penn, the founder of the colony of Pennsylvania. Julielma was the first of the family to leave the Quaker meeting, and she then joined the Methodist Church. And when she was in the Methodist Church, she was seen walking down Union Street in Lynn, arm in arm with Frederick Douglass. Well, you can only imagine the scandal and the talk this caused. So she was called into the minister's office, and Lydia went with her. And by the way, they put the Quaker garb on to go to this meeting. And basically, Julielma got thrown out of the Methodist Church because of her activities. And she was asked, why she did that. And she says, well, he's my friend. I've known him for years. And that was all the minister had to hear. And she was out of the church. Lydia became something of a spiritualist throughout her life. And she, even more so in the few months between the time that her sons died and that she herself passed away. So she went to seances. She may have had some in her house. We don't know that. The unfortunate thing in a lot of women's history is that we don't have their original papers. More questions, Julie?
Yes. So somebody would like you to list what was in the compound again.
Okay.
Is it still thought of as being effective, and if you know what for, what might it help
Okay, let me find the place where I did, yes, I have the notes here, and I will give you the list again. Unicorn root, life root, black cohosh, pleurisy root, fenugreek seed, and alcohol. Now, as I understand it, in the early years, there was 18% alcohol in this thing. Later, much after Lydia's passing, when her children were still involved in the company, the two remaining children, the FDA was founded and the alcohol content had to be reduced. She was trying to help women who were having what we would perhaps, or she would have perhaps called female problems. And as I had said earlier, when people took this medicine, if you will, they felt a lot better, and they wrote, and at least those are the ones we've heard about now. If there were people for whom it didn't work, we don't get those stories passed on to us.
So how old was Lydia when she passed away,
And do you know how many years between the start of her business and her death was she kind of in charge of her business?
Yeah, she was 64 when she died, and I can't do math real quick, but she was born in 1819, died in 1883, and was in charge of her business from 1873 when it started. So she actually was only really actively involved in it for about 10 years. But they kept her name on all the advertising, and that picture was there for everyone to see. So there was some confusion for a while. People thought that Lydia was still alive. And when they found out that she had passed away, they thought that they were being taken in some way. But they said, well, her daughter-in-law, who she trained, is doing all the things that Lydia did. Of course, at that point, the medicine was being made in the factory. But the daughter-in-law, whose name was Jenny Pinkham, was doing her best to answer as many letters as she could, of course, with the help of the lady typewriters.
Is there any evidence that Lydia Pinkham intended to help women self-medicate with her tonic? Was her intention to mitigate women's harsh lives of the time?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I give Lydia Pinkham all the credit for saying, and telling people, open your windows, bathe daily, eat a healthy diet. I mean, these things all sound very familiar to us today. And she said that she was an untitled woman. In other words, she had no college degree of any time, but that her goal was to help women.
Do you know what the reaction was from the medical community when Lydia told people, don't go to doctors?
Well, that's an interesting one. I think it probably was mixed, to say the very least. I mean, at that time, there were no or very few women doctors. The doctors were mostly men. But I think possibly some of the male doctors were just as happy to have the women go to Lydia for help with their issues. Some of them probably also thought that, she was a snake oil salesperson, as they say.
Was Lydia Pinkham considered the first women-owned mail-order business?
Yes, was she the first woman to have a woman-owned mail-order business? And yes, that is, I think, to the best of my knowledge, and there may be somebody out there who has some other information. If she was not the first, she was one of the first. Because remember, this is the 19th century. Women were basically supposed to stay home, take care of the house, take care of the children, have the dinner on the table, and that was their role.
Does the legacy of Lydia Pinkham still include the Well Baby Care and Immunization Clinic in Salem? And are there any other lesser known things that Lydia Pinkham's legacy may still support today?
Very interesting question. Now, yes, the Well Baby Clinic still is here on Derby Street in Salem. We came in right by it tonight. And there's an interesting connection to the House of the Seven Gables that I'm glad I get to talk about, because you might wonder, why is the House of the Seven Gables having a talk about Lydia Pinkham of Lynn? Well, Lydia's daughter, Caroline, when she grew up, married William Gove, and they built a house on Lafayette Street in Salem. And then in 1910, both Caroline Gove and Caroline Emerton were appointed as trustees to the then Plummer Home for Boys. And there's a great article that was written at the time saying, how wonderful this was, that women wanted to be involved, that they felt this was going to be a good influence on the boys. And Caroline Emerton had just opened the House of the Seven Gables at that point. So clearly the two of them knew each other. And I have read or been told that they founded, during and after World War I, they founded some well baby clinics. They called them baby weighing stations, but there was more being done there than weighing. There were vaccinations, there was milk given out for those who needed it, and the babies could go there and be seen by a doctor. And And then that evolved into the Lydia Pinkham Clinic that's down on Derby Street as a memorial to Lydia.
Do you by any chance know who some of the mansions on Western Ave and Lynn were built for? Who might have also been living around
Also,
the area?
I don't. That's a great question, and that's probably something I need to research further once things are open again, when this virus goes away.
And this one wasn't a question, but a comment who our Zoom followers got to see, but you didn't get to. So this was, as I was during my teenage years an avid antique bottle collector and found most of my collection by digging through old city dumps. I can tell you the most prevalent patent medicine bottle in the dump in our town, which closed around 1900, was the Lydia Pinkham bottle, like the one you displayed.
Wow.
Judging from the number that we found each time we went digging, we would conjecture that the family must have been millionaires. It's amazing to see so many empty bottles.
Wow. Well, the very first bottle I got, which is this one, came from an antique show in Topsfield. There was a man who specialized in bottles, and I went up to him. I had, just done the talk. This was before I started collecting, and I said, "Do you, by any chance, have any Lydia Pinkham bottles?" And he pointed at his table and said, "Take your pick." And this is what I came up with. And then later on eBay, believe it or not, eBay is a great source for Lydia Pinkham. Most of the items that I've showed you tonight, I found on eBay, and they know I look for them. So every so often I'll get a notice and say, "This is for sale. Are you interested?"
And then just two more comments from the crowd that I know you couldn't see. These both came from Lydia Pinkham tenants who are over there. One is Bobby Bush, who's a photographer who recently moved from Salem over to the building, and said that she moved to the building last December and she loves it over there.
Oh, great.
And then our other comment, I didn't write down the name, Kathleen Cormier, I think I'm saying your name right. I work in the Lydia Pinkham building in Lynn and have recently seen mail addressed to Lydia. So still happening today.
It's still coming. A friend of ours who has an antique store up in Maine came across some stationery from the Lydia Pinkham Company. So I have a little supply of that, but I don't think I'll be writing on it anytime soon.
And then we just had one last request from the audience, if you wouldn't mind maybe just typing up the author and title of some of the books in your
Sure.
collection so that we can share those with the attendees.
I'd be happy to do that, absolutely, and I'll email that to you, Julie, tomorrow.
I don't see any more questions today. I'm happy to come to a little bit by.
Okay.
So normally when we would end an lecture, we would ask for a big round of applause. So feel free to give us a little clap on Zoom or a cheer or a yay. And we really hope that you enjoyed, kind of our real first Zoom virtual lecture tonight. If you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear it. We would love to improve these as we go on. Some other enterprising women events that we have coming up on July 6th. Chrissy Vaccaro from Wild Sea Wellness is a local yoga entrepreneur and marine biologist for her day job. We'll be having a full moon yoga here at the House of the Seven Gables and also virtually. And Robin Woodman, who's another one of our board members who has forever been studying the life of Susanna Ingersoll and using a lot of Irene Axelrod's knowledge to talk about Caroline Emerton. We'll be talking about Strong Women of the Gables on August 26th. So we will be very excited to welcome you to more events. Please check our website. Come visit the gardens. As you can see from behind us, it's outstanding. And just, Irene, you're amazing. Thank you so much. And all of you, thank you so, so much for being with us tonight. And we cannot wait to see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.